Welcome to Bloom with Chelsea Rose. I'm so excited to have you here, Kaeley. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Snowy Colorado.
So gorgeous. And so I would love to just jump right into it. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what kind of work that you do?
Yeah, my name's Kaeley Pruitt-Hamm, and I know Chelsea Rose through the music and activist scene in Los Angeles. I am a community organizer and musician, and I perform and organize events under the name KPH, my initials, and the Canary Collective, because I was working in the nonprofit field and working as an environmental lobbyist in Washington, D.C. when I fell very ill from mysterious illness when I was 25 years old. And when doctors in the Western medical field couldn't diagnose what was going on and were just calling it autoimmune, I started to explore the definition of autoimmune versus actually believing what was going on in my body as a potentially being influenced by environmental toxins and different things that are going on with a lot of people's bodies in this modern world. And so I wanted to create a community of artful activists who are raising our voices in the name of raising awareness about what's going on with our Earth's ecosystems and what's going on with our body's ecosystems as canaries in the coal mine, which are feeling the toxic effects.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how you've built this Canary Collective, like giving those folks a place to come together and relate to one another and act on it and make a difference. And so I would love to hear a little bit about your backstory. Like, where did you grow up? What was life like before this all happened to you versus after?
Yeah. I was the daughter of some hippie parents. I think we who like play folk music, so I think that we have that in common. I don't know if your parents are hippies, but I know they're talented musicians.
Yeah, they're
um,
somewhat hippie, I guess you could say. I think I'm more hippie than they are at this point, but
yeah, our generation is going through a unique time, but so were they in the 60s, 70s, 80s. So my family was really progressive, like involved in a lot of activist uh, activities like anti-nuclear weapon marches and protests. And that's how my parents met in Seattle. And but when I was born, 10 years after my sister, uh, they moved to a really, really conservative area in northeastern Washington state, which is like has some of the highest numbers of white supremacist groups in the world that
wow.
gather in that region. And it also happens to be in it's like the Colville area, which is about 2 hours north of Spokane, Washington. So it's really close to the border of Canada and close to Idaho. It's a very northeast corner, beautiful place to grow up. I grew up on a mountain. We raised goats and pigs and had horses and chickens and dogs.
Wow.
So it was really idyllic aesthetically childhood, like really beautiful in the foothills. And the view that I had growing up, I'd sit at my piano writing songs at age 7 and just look out to the rolling hills and the mountains. We could see Canada from our house. and see the Lake Roosevelt, which is part of the Columbia River, but because of the Grand Coulee Dam, I understand it turned into like a lake.
Wow.
And that history of that region is actually like they've traced some of the oldest human remains in that area, like thousands of years old. That was like a gathering place for a lot of indigenous American Indian communities to come, and it was just so diverse. The ecosystems where there was so much plenty of salmon and fish, and it would be this place where so many different tribes came together. And then when the white settlers colonized that part of the country, there's not only horrific genocide of Native American people, but there was also horrific, hand in hand with that came the genocide of the ecosystems. And the dam was put in place, and it completely changed the amount of fish and all of the ecosystems. So it's still beautiful. I grew up in a beautiful place, but with that history and then the current climate of so many white settlers, or the majority white people that we were growing up around who have this animosity towards people of color, I think it was a very unique place to grow up as an activist, feeling like, wow, this country is kind of messed up.
And so were you aware of that history when you were growing up there, or is that something that you learned later on?
I'm learning more later on in life, but I had the juxtaposition of like my parents trying to teach me about that. And we would, ever since I was a little girl, like for the summer camp, we would go to like anti-racism workshops and like try to learn about that and how to be allies who were taking down the systems of oppression, like as US citizens with so much privilege, to like use our privilege to lobby members of Congress and against like bombing foreign countries like the Middle East. And but in school, then when I was in the public school system, like I had teachers who would say like, Jesus will hate you if you have sex before marriage. And like, they would like require us to say the Pledge of Allegiance and talk about the history of the United States and the Oregon Trail and everything from such a different perspective. So yeah, I think I was kind of thinking about the history of the region, but I also just had all the pressures of like all of my mentors and teachers and peers having a very different analysis of what was going on.
Yeah. Wow. So you really like grew up with that duality, or you were aware of that duality from a young age. It sounds like.
I guess.
That's so, I mean, whether you were aware of it or not, you were surrounded by this duality, it seems.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that shaped how I think about activism now, because I had a lot of best friends who were in Republican families, and just what's going on with our country now. I think about how you wonder like, how can someone possibly be and I know we welcome people of all ideologies and politics in this podcast, I'm sure, but in my personal opinion, it's hard to imagine someone who can look at the president that we have, President Donald Trump, who is openly embracing white supremacy in certain ways, and to be behind that, but to like be able to see how someone could get to that place with the education system that we have in our school and everything. And just think, how can we, without shutting one another out? Because I didn't have the option of just shutting everyone out. I had to find a way of like still having friends and having dialogue, especially from white people to white people talking about race and how to call one another in to the movement.
And that's part of what I love about your activism. Like the vibe that I get from you is very welcoming. And I think that's really important, is to like welcome people in to learning and to discussion, rather than judging and like setting people apart. I think that's really important. And that's something that like I am still learning, And so I'd love to ask you, so when you got sick, like how did that all start? And what was that? That was a whole journey for you. What was that experience like?
Yeah. I try to make this story as short as possible, but I was having health issues since I was about 6 years old, but it culminated in a huge catastrophic level when I was 25. So it's been a really long journey. Um, but when I was a little kid, I actually started to get strep throat all the time, where I would get like strep throat infections like 7 times a year, accompanied by a fever of like 100, 304, and throwing up and vomiting,
Oh
like
my
through a strep throat.
gosh.
And I missed so much school. I probably had like the worst attendance record throughout my entire school time of anyone. I remember hearing that. And so I was sick a lot, and then I started to get like pain in my hands and elbows and wrists, and a lot of issues with yeast infections, vaginally and like systemically, and a lot of TMJ, just like pain in every joint, basically. And so I was diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, but doctors said that I would grow out of it, and just IBS and TMJ and all these little things that doctors kept on like kicking the can down the road, and not really understanding the root cause, because when you
Mm,
come in with so many different symptoms in all the different areas of your body, it um, the medical system is kind of trained to just be siloed and okay, well, I'm sending you to a hand specialist, and okay, I'm sending it to a gut specialist, as
right.
you know. But once I hit age 25, um, there were just a number of things that I think spiritually, emotionally, and physically were the straws on the camel's back. And I got a bug bite like when I was 6, and you know, the doctor said there's no way that you have Lyme disease. Lyme disease is really rare, but it was like a tick bite in the back of my head, and that's kind of one of the triggers potentially to my overall illness. Was like Lyme disease is an aspect of it that was missed for a long time. But I got another bug bite when I was in West Virginia, and I had just gotten a job in Washington, D.C. And I was like kayaking with my coworkers in 2014. And that bug bite swelled to like the size of a ping pong ball in the back of my neck. And my lymph nodes were so swollen, like rock hard in my neck. And I obviously had this like huge immune response. I woke up that night after the bug bite, like in my apartment in DC, like with the sheets completely soaked in sweat. I was having night sweats. And then I was like working at my desk, like my window to the Senate office buildings in DC, like loving my job, but I would be like, tears would be streaming down my face because it hurt so badly to hold like my head on my neck and to type. Like my hands were hurting so bad. And I was so sensitive to light. Like I was driving around the country in rental cars, giving workshops to young kids on how to convince members of Congress that all of the different manifestations of climate change that were happening in their communities, like extreme blizzards in Buffalo, New York, and the oyster industry being ruined in Louisiana, and an inordinate amount of droughts and fires in California, they were bringing these stories through like handmade cards and in-person meetings as kids to members of Congress, convincing them that climate change is
Mm,
happening and something needs to happen. And meanwhile, all of these storms and symptoms of climate crisis inside my body were happening. And so I was driving, like giving these workshops, and like I had to like use my left foot to like push the accelerator on the car because my right ankle was so swollen. And I had to like squint because the headlights in front of me were like so bright. And it just hurt my eyes so bad. Like, and I was having ringing in my ears. Then I started to have the strep throat again, where I just like could not swallow, could not talk. So there are all these big symptoms that were very difficult to ignore, that were getting in the way of me living my life. Just like people are feeling now, a lot of people are feeling symptoms that are impossible to ignore of climate change, of, okay, well, now my house is burnt down. Like that's pretty hard to just ignore. And okay, Like, I can't make any money anymore as an oyster fisherman.
Yeah.
And all of these symptoms, though, we are being gaslit by literally by the gas and oil companies and fossil fuel industry. Like Chevron knew for the last 40 years that fossil fuel projects carried on the way they are. They did the science. They knew that it's going to raise temperatures to dangerous levels and we're going to have all kinds of catastrophic consequences. And they still went forward with their projects that they had invested in and invested millions of dollars into marketing campaigns that would silence voices, raising voices of concern, saying, uh-oh, like we shouldn't do this. Like, what about climate change? And they're systematically trying to delegitimize and say, no, those fires are a fluke, or no, these fires are what's supposed to happen, like wildfires are natural, or like, no, it's rising tides don't exist, or like having our president say things like, it's, what do you mean global warming? There's snow.
So it seems that that's part of your life's work, is to like bring light and truth to the global crises that we're having. And so do you attribute the illness you were experiencing to the climate as well?
I think that obviously we're on a planet Earth, so everything is connected to what's going on with Earth. But in a more literal sense, like I was living in a house at the time that I fell really ill because it was the cheapest rent I could find, because we're living in, you know, a time when it's really difficult to afford housing. It was the cheapest rent I could find. And the way that we've like built houses in the last century is like with really toxic building materials. And then like our water system is really toxic. And I think it weighs on everyone's bodies in different ways. And maybe some people can handle smoking a pack a day of cigarettes and they won't get lung cancer, but some people are sensitive. And, you know, I was sensitive, and like the water coming out was like brown and moldy tasting in the house that I was living in. And when there was like a moth infestation in the kitchen, the landlord like called the cheapest exterminating company that they could find. And they like blasted the kitchen with toxic pesticides. And after that point, like I got my sickest, where my body just reacted so strongly to those petrochemicals that were being used. And my throat started closing up, and I was having like neurological symptoms, which like those pesticides basically do to a way smaller degree to our bodies what they're doing to bugs. You know, like if you have a bee's nest, you spray it and those bees get like paralyzed, and it's like a neurotoxin for them and toxic to their liver and everything. But we're just larger, so it doesn't necessarily affect us the same way. We don't die. But all these pesticides that are in, you know, the glyphosate and the DDT, the DEET that is like Roundup in our food system and everything, is like slowly killing us.
Yeah.
Like we're bees.
Yeah. So yeah, it seems like you're very aware of all the full spectrum of everything that affects our bodies and our health, and how all of that is tied together. And so, and you were bedridden for like a few years, right?
Yeah. So after that, just I obviously couldn't work anymore. For like 3 or 4 years, most days of the week, I couldn't like sit upright in a chair longer than like 5 minutes a day. I couldn't keep my eyes open. I haven't been able to read a book in 6 years, very easily. Like maybe here and there I have, but it is excruciating, with my optic nerve, my eyes, something going on. But what I found now that I've worked with holistic, naturopathic, or environmental medicine, functional medicine practitioners, which is a different wave of medicine besides the Western medicine view of like, okay, pound it out with antibiotics or like put a Band-Aid on it or doing surgery, which all can be incredibly important and helpful. But when they're multi-systemic issues, sometimes it helps to work with holistic doctors. And they say that there's this like rising trend of especially women getting diagnosed with autoimmune diseases. Now it's approximated that 1 out of 2, 50%, about 45% of Americans have been or will be diagnosed with a chronic illness, mostly autoimmune disease.
45%.
Yes.
And autoimmune, isn't that sort of just like a blanket term?
Yeah.
For like a lot of different things.
Yeah. And I think that has been the biggest thing for me to wrap my head around, because I now have been exposed to like the mind-body connection and how much we do have a lot of like when people have trauma, like a history of sexual assault, which I also do, your body can get in a fight or flight response and kind of have a readiness to react in an inflammatory way to whatever it interprets as a threat. Mm-hmm. And we can have the power to heal so that we're not reacting in an inflammatory way to even these real toxins and real viruses, and infections and pathogens. So it's kind of like a mind bend to acknowledge that at the same time as saying it would be really hard to just tell one of those bees that is being exposed to pesticides to like think positive thoughts and not react to that toxin.
Yeah.
So with autoimmune disease, the autoimmune definition is like, for example, if you have Sjogren's, I think, or like thyroid autoimmune condition, the Western medical view of saying that's an autoimmune disease is saying that we're seeing a lot of inflammation near your thyroid tissue. Or actually, I'll say a simpler one for myself. I have a diagnosis of interstitial cystitis and endometriosis, which are just names for there's a lot of inflammation and pain going on in your pelvic region and your bladder. And so it means that I have to pee like 8 times a night, that it hurts to pee just constantly for years, that my periods like are really, really, really painful. And they don't know why. The doctors say, that's just inflammation for one reason or another. And the only solution is to slice you open from your stomach and scrape out the tissue that's inflamed. But like, if it's autoimmune, that's your body attacking tissue in your body. Your immune system, just like your immune system is little soldiers that are like on guard, like I'm going to attack this tissue, and like it's enemy tissue, but they're not finding any pathogens or toxins that they're defining as enemy. So they're saying your body is fighting your tissue for no reason. So the only answer to autoimmune disease is to either like scrape out the tissue that it's naming as enemy territory, and or give you steroids that quell your immune response and put your soldiers to sleep on the battlefield. And because it's saying your body isn't under attack, your body is overreacting in anger, there's no reason. And maybe that is true. Maybe there's truth to that, and maybe it can really be helpful for a lot of people who have autoimmune disease. They need to take steroids and things that are immunosuppressant because there is that feedback loop of inflammation. So I'm not saying that people should not follow their doctor's orders. I'm not a doctor. But in my experience, it's been extremely liberating, and I've actually gained so much healing and functionality back in my body by working with functional medicine doctors and even shamanic practitioners.
Yeah. And I'd love to ask you more about that, because it seems that you've been exploring these different kinds of healing. What is functional medicine?
Functional medicine is like a holistic view of healing, looking at someone's housing, their environment, their diet, their lifestyle of exercise, their emotional trauma, their spiritual health, even past life work, which I did not used to believe in. So just to throw a wrench in things even more to like a paradigm shift for me was realizing that there may be some emotional and spiritual underpinnings of my illness that are very subconscious. And it doesn't mean that the physical infections and toxins aren't real and that I don't also have to have medicine. Like antiviral herbs have been extremely helpful, recognizing that I have Epstein-Barr virus chronically, that Lyme disease medicine, like anti-parasitic medicine, which a lot of us have when you get your body out of balance, to go on a diet that reduces the amount of toxins you're exposed to by eating organic, etc. But also, I was having like the sore throat issue and the strep throat like consistently, where my tongue would swell anytime I was exposed to like perfumes, and someone who just walked in the room who had just showered with herbal essences shampoo or something, my throat would like start to close and I wouldn't be able to open my eyes, and I would stutter like I was like being poisoned with neurotoxins. And there's a Harvard doctor who's a functional medicine doctor, who's an amazing medical doctor and surgeon, who his name is Dr. Bernhoft, Robin Bernhoft. And he believes that the reason for chemical sensitivity, like perfume and fragrance sensitivity, like I had and he had, is because the body gets so overwhelmed by petrochemicals and viruses that your liver can't process any more toxins or any hints of toxins. So your body starts to develop these like, no more toxins. And a lot of our everyday products and perfumes and everything actually contain really like carcinogenic, cancer causing petrochemicals. And petrochemicals are from fossil fuels. Like we have all of these different ways that we use fossil fuels and our cleaning products and everything. And the liver just stops being able to handle all of that. Its bucket's full.
Wow. Yeah. I've been learning more and more just about all the toxins, like in everything, in our food, our clothing, household items. And and in our water. It's very, it's been eye-opening and scary. And so I wanted to ask you, like, I'm always just so amazed at your resilience and your ability to create art and continue your activism, even as you're facing these health struggles. How do you find hope in those times? Like, what keeps you going?
Yeah. I don't mean to be fear mongering, because it's like really overwhelming once you start realizing how toxic our world is. And it's like, what do I do? What do I buy? Where can I go? It feels so hopeless. Like climate crises are happening. But I guess I didn't finish about the throat thing. I have come to now be working with more indigenous, earth-based shamanic practices and practitioners who are teaching me about this other way of viewing the planet and the human condition that feels so much more hopeful and so much more doable than the like approach to activism and art that I had formerly been taking. So for example, I had the throat issue, and I didn't believe in past lives. I thought, oh, like there's this wave of people calling themselves shamans. And like, you know how a lot of people say like, this is so woo woo, like I'm saging my house. Like I was never into any of that stuff. Well, I learned that woo woo is actually like a racist slur that was developed to systematically delegitimize indigenous, I think specifically Native American ways of healing. And that was like a systematic colonizer tactic, whether it was like the British invading First Nations people in America, or, you know, British invading Australia and the Aboriginal erasure, or people taking slaves from Africa and erasing the knowledge of African people, the ways that they were using healing and having shamanic medicine people in their communities. It was then replaced with this Judeo-Christian, like, no, like you need to have this habit of answering to this like older white man in church. It's like the definition of your reality. And again, there are a lot of positive things about Christianity and like a lot of positive things. I'm not trying to say that Christianity is evil and that all shamanism is great, but it's been kind of imbalanced. And going back to a little bit on the end of the spectrum of honoring indigenous wisdom, even in my ancestor line of like, I come from a Celtic background. A lot of my ancestors were Irish, and the like witches and earth-based practices that were like through burning of witches and colonization of Irish pagan religions, and like Norse shamanism, that was systematically erased as well. And so a lot of my like returning to Celtic shamanism has been really profound. So one of my doctors, when I wasn't responding to like this focus on like having IVs and healing through like physical medicine, I just kept on, like, it was my 4th or 5th year of treatment and I still was like mostly bedridden still. And they're like, well, sometimes when people just can't get better, like we send them to these Celtic shamans and like, you want to just try that? And I was like, I am so desperate. So I'm going to just book this session with this Celtic shaman and see what happens. And
yeah. And so what happened?
So I had a session where she said, the root cause of your like chronic sore throats is partially from your body's cellular memory of like many past lives, but a past life in particular in which I was a prophet who was like speaking out in like Spain or something in the 1600s or so. And the queen didn't like what I was having to say because it was criticizing the regime. And so she ordered my tongue to be cut off. And it sounded so completely bizarre. And who knows if it was a placebo effect or just my imagination that changed things. But then the next day I woke up and like 90% gone. Like my sore throats, which I used to have 2 weeks out of every month, the swollen tongue has happened like 90% less since that time. It just happened overnight.
And that was just from the knowledge of knowing it. Did you guys do any sort of like cleansing, or was there anything that went with that knowledge?
Yeah. So in Celtic shamanism and a lot of shamanic practices around the world, it's not just like the intellectualization and intellectual understanding of something. They believe in energy, that energy actually shifts. So the energy shifted, you can kind of time travel. Like you can go back in time and change the energy so that the energy doesn't get stuck. And it's very difficult to explain or believe. Like, I'm not sure what I believe totally, but it's not just the understanding of that. It is actually something that happens energetically to shift, almost like a surgery that like removes something from your body. So I don't know, but that really changed my life. And what gives me hope is viewing this wild experience of like being a human on this planet as like potentially just a series of many different lessons that we are here to experience and do the best we can with what we can. If we have past lives, if it's true, why would you want to do something in your calling, in your vocation that is generic, that anyone could do? Why don't you think about the specific gifts that you have? What if I have the next life, I can't sing, or I don't like music in the next life? Then it would be a waste to not use the voice that I have as much as I can now, and like do music in the way that I really like to do now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about music too. It's so interesting too, having this experience with your throat and you being a singer. And so what do you find music to be part of your healing? Like what is music to you? What does it mean to you?
Music is changing the way that it means to me because I've started to study with sound healers and reading books. Like there's a book called Healing Sounds by Jonathan Goldman. And it talks about how putting intention of what you want to see in the world or manifest plus sound like exponentially makes it more likely that you will manifest what you want to see in the world, like with the power of music.
Why is that? Do you think because it's just like you're taking one vibration and you're adding another vibration to make it more powerful? That's what that's what I imagine.
I know it's a good question. I feel like such a hippie in the 70s being like, dude, vibes. And I really cannot believe that I'm talking about this openly and publicly now, but that's just like what having a life-changing illness and like near-death experience pretty much will do like to you. But I think what really I've been reading these books and I've been trying to learn from people who are really grounded in science as well. Like Brian Weiss's books. Brian Weiss is a Columbia and Yale medical doctor, like psychiatrist, and he totally didn't believe in past lives and then started using hypnotherapy to heal patients' ailments. And like if patients had like cancer in their lower back or something, he would take them back in regression and hypnotherapy to like, usually they would come up with like a memory, like I was 3 years old and I was abused. And then like healing that through like work with the subconscious at the hypnosis level would sometimes like spontaneously in a month, like resolve stage 4 cancer in people. But then what started to happen is his patients started to regress back to like, it's the year 1700 BC and I'm in Egypt and I am drowning. And that's like my anxiety and fear of water. And it like completely resolves in patients. And he started to get convinced that past lives are real. And so I don't know if we're all just going off our rockers, but it's pretty fun to believe that music is not only aesthetically powerful and just fun, but or for like human pleasure, but it can be actually powerful change-making tools to use sound. Yeah. So I love that my favorite thing is to sing in groups of people in harmony. And I love your music and I love the way that you and your sister sing harmony. And I think there's a power in group intention setting and a power in group healing. So it is very sad during COVID to not be able to have these live experiences of music.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think we can still reach people with our music though. And I think that is one of the powers of like recorded music and even doing things virtually, like all these things that you're talking about, energy, like, you know, that's kind of been a theme in the last few episodes of this podcast. I've been talking to different healers and learning more myself just about all the energy that's out there, that's there that we can't see, but it's really powerful. And so I think that like when you are making music and you're putting it out there, it's an energy and it's a healing. I think first off, I know that when I write music, I'm sure you can relate, it's healing for me. Yeah. It's like a channeling and it's cathartic and I'm channeling this emotion and these emotions and this pent up energy. I'm channeling it into something else, into these vibrational forms outside of my body. And then when someone listens, they're receiving them on the other end. Yeah. So I think that it can be so powerful in that way. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about your album, Well, you have two albums out now. The Canary Collective, Volume 1 is your first album. And you just released another album this year called The 5 and 3.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because from my understanding, you recorded that all yourself. Right?
Yeah. I recorded the 5 and 3 when I had to flee my apartment in Los Angeles at the dawn of COVID. And I was in my trailer in Joshua Tree. It's like a trailer in which I healed a great deal because it's built with non-toxic materials. And I was in the Joshua Tree desert alone for about 100 days, like no human contact except like Malia came and brought me some of my medicine and we went on a walk 10 feet apart outside for 2 hours.
And you also didn't have internet sometimes, right?
Oh yeah.
Or a lot of the times. So you were really isolated out there. I want to know, how did you survive that? And how did this album come about?
Yeah. I was in a romantic relationship with someone I was really in love with. And on our 5-year anniversary, he broke up with me a week or two into quarantine, and I wish him well. He's a wonderful person, and it was absolutely the right thing to do. I have no regrets at all. And he needed healing and I needed healing. It was actually the greatest gift that he could have given, but it hurt like hell. And it was terrifying to be just left with no distractions but myself.
That just gave me chills. I don't know why. Just I think quarantine for a lot of us, just being there alone with our thoughts can be so intense. And I can only imagine after an experience like that. So continue on. I'd love to hear about this experience.
Well, you were alone too. You've been really strong. You've been a source of inspiration for me. So I am not so great at, I haven't been that great at being alone because I've been really terrified to be in my body because it's been a really painful place to be. But I think I have been having more compassion for myself and staying on my own body's side. And especially after the kind of gaslighting of doctors and everything, that's a whole other story. But I kind of realized that being with my own self and even my worst fears were coming true. I have a special fear of earthquakes, and there was an earthquake that happened in my trailer. Also that same week, my cousin passed away that week. It was just a very rough week in April. And it was all my worst nightmares were happening. But then when you move through that and you're oh, I'm still here, on the other side, it's very empowering. And so I recorded that album, and I only worked with women artists who are people of color and gender nonconforming people and queer people on the album as a way of just because I know it's really disproportionate. There are a lot of amazing white guys who are in the music industry who are recording engineers. And I've worked with so many sweet, wonderful guys. But I wanted to have a different approach to making this album. And since I think it's 2% of sound engineers or people who own record labels are women.
Wow.
So I've been trying to learn EQing, and I just did it on GarageBand. It's not the highest quality album. It's lo-fi, but I've been working on doing custom sound healing songs as well for moving energy in different chakras and organizing different group intention setting. We have co-organized some canary calls for encouraging people to vote and mixing music, spiritual intention setting, and activism has been a really fun new wave of bringing together all the things that it's not all the problems that I've experienced, and then really arriving at some things that I'm excited could be solutions has been really exciting.
Yeah. And I just want to say the album's so beautiful. And I think that it came out amazing. I was really impressed with the quality in the production of it and the
Thank
songwriting.
you.
Like your voice is just it's so beautiful and it's so like magical and healing and calming to hear. And I'm also just really impressed by how you were like, all right, I'm just going to like make this album and I'm just going to like do it myself. I mean, work with other people, but also you did a lot of learning yourself, like you said, learning how to mix it and all these different things. Did you experience self-doubts in that process? And how did you overcome that to just push forward and say, I'm going to make this happen anyway?
I absolutely have. I have so many self-doubts still. I think that we're really trained to think that something has to be like you have to invest like $12,000 in it in order for it to sound good, quote unquote. And working with the sound healers who are teaching me sound healing and Joshua Tree over the phone was like really, really powerful at like wiping away the doubts.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. What is sound healing? Well, that's a very general question because I'm sure there's all different kinds. But what kind of sound healing were you learning? What was that experience like?
You see a lot of people doing sound healing from the approach of like, I have these 5 singing Himalayan singing bowls that are like, they're each like $500. Like, and I'm wearing like a white dress and I have sage and I'm like doing this certain like chakra music. And I'm not of that approach yet. Maybe I will be, and I'll eat my words, but I want things to be affordable, first of all. And I think there's so many barriers to people thinking that they can make art because they don't have the equipment or whatever. But even beyond art, just sound healing is like mixing intention and putting sound to it in order to move energy, like you have a garden hose that you're spraying at a patch of dirt that you need to like clean off a carrot. And so when I do sound healing sessions, I encourage people to imagine that their voice and whatever sound is coming out of their voice or their instrument is like a garden hose that is clearing away the dirt off the carrot or whatever they want to manifest. And it's just like that powerful intention, and it moves energy. And when I was working with the sound healing trainers in Joshua Tree, they're just like, don't worry about it sounding good. Like really, mainly the only thing that matters is your intention. And so if you have the intention to heal your heart or like heal your chronic UTIs, I have the intention that my body is healed. And I feel free and light and clear, and vital and full of energy. And then, like sing that.
Wow. So you set the intention and then just go for it. Like let the music move through you in no particular way. Right?
Yeah. And shamanic practice is all about like clearing out the stuck energy that is lower vibration first, and then filling that with the replacement of what you want. And that's exactly what we can do shamanically with the world, is like, what do we not want? We don't want racism. We don't want climate crises and all these wildfires. So what is the antidote? And I know you interviewed Malia Wright as well on your podcast. And like the perspective of Ayurvedic medicine is all about balance and antidotes. And, nothing is necessarily bad, but things can be off balance. And so then if there's like too much fire or like too much airy, wind, then the groundedness and earth is what replaces it. So similarly, if you have like an ailment in your body, these chronic UTIs or something, then moving out the energy with your sound and your voice of like intuitively. The sound healer I worked with, her name's Shar. She just says, you will know. You trust yourself. When you have the intention, you'll know what sound is the right thing. And every sound is perfect. It can sound terrible. It can be, it doesn't have to be beautiful.
Yeah.
Just do what needs to be done,
Mm.
shake it out, move your body, dance, and then imagine light pouring in and what you do want instead.
Oh,
And
that's so powerful. And I do think that I'm learning all about this stuff too. And I practice breath work sometimes on my own. And I do guitar channeling on my own and
yeah,
singing sometimes. And so I really I feel what that's like when you have stuck energy in your body. And now I feel like I can be more aware of it. Sometimes like I'll wake up in the morning and I'll feel that anxiety or I'll feel that stuck energy and I'll know that I need to do something to release it.
yeah,
And that can be singing, it can be moving my body, yoga, it can be playing guitar, but there's something about that movement
yeah,
where you're able to like move that energy out that is so healing.
yes. And I think a part of me has been reticent to get into this kind of like healing new age perspective, which is really old age because this like indigenous thousands of years old practices. But like I've been reticent because the activist in me, like I've had the goal of like impacting a large amount of people with a social movement of like rallies
Mm.
and marches and enacting laws that affect people, like going upstream at the root causes of the injustices of the world. And to me, just like sitting in my bed in my bedroom, isolated, meditating or like doing sound healing doesn't feel like it's doing anything, like hopes and prayers. But a book that really changed my perspective was The Power of Eight by Lynn McTaggart. That's another situation where she's working with like Western scientists and Ivy League scientists and proving the power of intention to actually have real life outcomes. That they would like take group of seeds A, group of seeds B, and they would have people from around the world get on Zoom 10 minutes a day for a week and envision that group A, they had the intention that it would grow so beautifully and so strong and so fast. And group A really statistically significantly grew so much faster, so much stronger than the group of seeds that didn't receive the intention. And then they tried it on healing people, and then they have been trying it on like world events and injustices, which is a lot
Wow.
harder to envision. But I think mixing that like intention setting and the real tools that I remember from my community organizing days, like actually tweeting a creative, beautiful song with your sound healing and getting it seen by a senator, you know, rather than just bringing a policy paper or tweeting an angry tweet at them.
Mm.
Like, write a beautiful letter or a poem and have it stand out, and send a picture of yourself with your mother and father who are immunocompromised and you're worried about COVID, like, and mail that personalized, artistic, from the heart message to these people in DC who are the decision makers upstream, who are so removed from their heart space and are so removed from what's going on the ground with people who are struggling to afford healthcare and housing. So it's my
Yes.
vision. That's my vision for the Canary
I
Collective.
love that so much because I feel like that I relate so much to that, like wanting action. Like, I
Yeah.
want to take action now. And I want to make sure that, like, what I'm doing is going to help the situation. But then also, I think that the intention is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I've talked about in this podcast is like the reality we're living in was manifested from man, from our minds, from our thoughts. Like we shape the world around us.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can change our vision of the world, we can create a different world, but we can't do that unless we have this vision of what we want to replace it with, like you said. And that's another thing that I found so inspiring in your performances pre-COVID. I got to witness you playing on stage with a band, and it was so cool. And I love the way that you would interact with the audience. And there was one song where you would always ask people to envision what they wanted in the future and to say it out loud. And people would like call out different things. And I think that's so powerful. And what I hope to do too with my music and art is like encourage people to like have hope and to have that vision.
Mm-hmm.
And I see music and art as a tool for that. It's like a necessary tool. And you're right, both are needed, like the action, but also like the heart, like coming from the heart, I
Yeah.
think is so important.
Yeah, but it can be so overwhelming right now with the news and everything. So my goal with any Canary Collective events that we're organizing together and otherwise is just do something. That's my approach to art, is like something is often better than nothing. And so
Mhm.
even if it's not perfect, and even if, oh, sorry if that was loud, even if it's not perfect and you have mistakes, and um, even if you can only do 20 minutes of writing one letter to a senator in a week, and that's all you can fit in for time, and you don't know everything about the policy, or you don't understand intellectually what truly to say, just you sharing your story and that you care, the members of Congress need to hear that. And that you just got to do what you can, and while still taking care of yourself, because I know that it takes a lot to take care of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Wow. Well, I feel like this just about wraps it up. There was one other thing that I was thinking about, something you mentioned about your body and your healing journey and the way that your perspective has changed.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been on my own journey of healing through Ayurvedic diets, which I think is so fascinating. But something I've learned recently and something that's shifted my perspective is like, I guess, forgiving your body
Mm-hmm.
for all the problems. And instead of being so frustrated and feeling like you're fighting against your body, to sort of like forgive and open up and even welcome in, like being accepting of your body and its full state, the way it is, and also being grateful for whatever lessons that you're learning through this journey of healing,
Yeah.
and has that been something like that you've experienced, that change in mindset? Do you feel like that has helped your healing and sort of like learning to accept where you're at in your journey?
Absolutely. A lot of the disability justice activists whom I admire a lot, like Leah Lakshmi Piepsina Samarasina, is an amazing disability justice and racial justice advocate and writer. And it's like also okay to have a body that's not able to walk, not able to sit upright in a chair. Everyone has value where they're at. And there's so many gifts of people who are immunocompromised and disabled. And we can just be with our bodies where they're at. And I hold that truth at the same time as also wanting to be a sort of musical Erin Brockovich, because if Erin Brockovich went around in her community whose water was being poisoned by a terrible toxin that the company PG&E was denying was happening, and she talked with all those neighbors who, the 9-year-old was having leukemia suddenly, the mother was having 6 miscarriages, their other neighbor was having a chronic cough, and they're all going into the doctor's offices and they're like, you should think positive thoughts, or you should work on past life trauma, or you should get hypnosis for, like, it's because you're traumatized from sexual assault that you're feeling these symptoms. That would have missed a big part of it. That would have been missing a piece of it, of saying, no, actually, it's like pretty dang hard to rise up above this like very toxic poison in your water system. And it's like manifesting differently in everyone's bodies, but it's kind of connected. And so I think that's the other piece that I really want to bring, in addition to like our self-healing that we can do, but also thinking of the systemic ways that just ecosystem distress is hurting our bodies, is like helping me have compassion for my body where it's at, just say, oh my gosh, of course you're having problems breathing and digesting things because your liver is so chock full of these toxins that companies have taken shortcuts and not been regulated and have gone and totally changed our food and water system and air. So holding companies accountable and corporations accountable, and that's a physical reality that is happening, and knowing that we need to, that's a solution that I want to see, is our soil being regenerated, returning to investing large scale in organic farming, restoring our food system, not using pesticides in the ways that we do. Actually, there's a documentary, Kiss the Ground, I think, saying that we can really reverse a lot of climate change, and like Fantastic Fungi with Paul Stamets research on how mycelium and mushrooms can really reverse a lot of this pollution and soil depletion. And there's so many solutions that can happen that simultaneously help heal our bodies that I also want to advocate for.
Yeah. I love it. And yeah, definitely check out those two documentaries. One is Fantastic Fungi. The other is Kiss the Ground. I have yet to see Kiss the Ground, but I'm hearing so much about it. I need to watch it like today.
Me too. I actually haven't seen it either, but I started a podcast too at the same time as you, the Canary Collective podcast, and I interviewed the episode is going to come out pretty soon. This guy named Jeff Catch, who works for the Rodale Institute and advocates for organic farming and soil restoration, but he has a really similar health story to me, where he got Lyme disease, he got sidelined from illness, just chronic infections all the time, feeling like he had the flu all the time, and all these doctors being like, we don't know why, like taking an antidepressant. And then he was like, oh my gosh, my body is like a depleted landscape that I need to replenish with, and like build up the ecosystems of my body, just like we need to build up the ecosystems of the land. So that's why I'm like excited about this documentary, but I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll have to like, talk about it once we both watch it. Yeah. So people can find your podcast on all streaming platforms.
Yeah. I use Anchor FM. So it's on Anchor and Spotify and Amazon Music, and
what's the name of your podcast?
The Canary Collective podcast. Pretty much just Googling the Canary Collective will pull up what you need to know.
So be sure, as you're listening right now in your podcast streaming app, be sure to open it up and find the Canary Collective, subscribe. And people can also find you on Instagram, correct? At KPH and the Canary Collective.
Yeah. And then we also both have Patreon in common, just this other way of funding artists' work as patrons with monthly support. So I'm so excited for that being more of a norm for people.
Yeah. And artists. So what is your Patreon link where people can find you there?
It's patreon.com/KPH, which are my initials. It's also like kilometers per hour.
I never thought about that. Amazing. So we'll link all of that in the show notes so everyone can go and follow Kaeley. And also just be sure to check her out on Instagram, because she's always hosting like awesome events, virtual events that mix together activism and intention and art. We've had a few letter writing parties where we sit down and write letters and also play music at the same time. And those have felt so good. Like you said, it just feels so good just to like do something. Doing something feels so much better than doing nothing. So be sure to find Kaeley and follow her. And thank you so much, Kaeley, for talking with me today and sharing your story and your intentions and your vision for the future. It's just so inspiring.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. It was, you're so good at just listening and asking deep questions. You bring this curiosity, which is really inspiring at the same time as you modeling, like walking your talk and really just doing a lot of things that you love to do and are passionate about consistently, from like dancing and taking care of yourself to doing this podcast and doing music. So I'm excited to continue working with you.
Yeah. You as well. Well, have a great rest of your day. I'll
Thanks,
talk
you
to you
too.
soon.
Okay.
Bye.